Hey guys, what's going on? Banana156 here with another video. Remember to subscribe, like, comment, do all that stuff. I do read all comments, so make sure to leave one. And yeah, so this video is going to be about China. And yeah, this is the next video in my geopolitical series. And now it seems like it's pretty common to think that China is the next superpower. Most people think that, like China's on the rise, America is declining. But is that really the case? That's the goal that I had when I made this video. Is China really guaranteed to be the next superpower? And in this video, we're going to look at China in 6 different lenses, and we're just gonna look at China and see if it's a guarantee that they're the next superpower, because China's a quite complicated country, and it's really interesting to research. So yeah, let's get right into it. Before we get into the 6 different lenses of analysis, first I want to set the stage for China currently as it is. So, as most of you probably know, China is the largest economy in the world, and has been growing incredibly quickly. And their economy's been growing really quickly. They're the largest industrial power in the world, and they have been spreading influence onto every continent with varying plans to influence them. And this economic growth is just incredible, and this shouldn't be forgotten. But China had a smaller economy than Canada or Italy in 1980. So in 40 years, they became the largest economy in the world. Now, this growth does have some caveats and is an interesting thing to analyze. So before we get into the 6 different lenses, I wanted to talk about that first, because that has a bit to do with quite a bit of what happened to China and what China's future may be. So yeah, before we get into those, I just wanted to talk about that. The first lens that I want to look at China through is a geopolitical one. So first of all, let's talk about China's population and how their population is distributed. So 94% of their population is distributed in the west-eastern west-eastern part of the country, and then only 6% is in the western part, and the 6% inhabiting the western part are mostly ethnic minorities who hate the Chinese as well, which isn't very good for them either, or isn't very good. The next thing is China has inhabited the area that they've been in for at least 4,000 years, if not more, and that means that most of the countries that are still around them are very tough countries, because they've resisted China for 4,000 years. So like Japan, Indonesia, Australia, they've all been decently strong. But when China in the 1400s, they basically had complete control over their area. They were basically the country. They were the power there. All the other countries were basically Chinese wannabes, and basically that. But a lot of these countries, like India, Japan, Indonesia, don't like China very much, and that leads them to becoming American allies, which makes a lot more sense for them, because the U.S. doesn't care. It won't be as badgering to them, and won't be as authoritarian to them, because they're farther away, and they're a lot more forgiving than the China Communist Party as well. The next thing I want to talk about is their foreign policy. This is also in the geopolitical part too, but their foreign policy is pretty arrogant, a lot like the American foreign policy, but I want to contrast the two. So American foreign policy is arrogant in the way that countries are American wannabes, and this causes America to do things like going into a country, toppling a dictatorship, and establishing democracy. This doesn't work, because a lot of these countries can't really sustain a democracy, and or they topple a dictator and establish another dictator, which isn't good, and they just invade countries because why not? And whereas China is arrogant in a different way, they do things like setting up a donkey slaughterhouse where it's a taboo, or saying terrible things to the press. They do things like that, which is very arrogant. And the next thing about China and American foreign policy that is different is that American foreign policy is very short-term, while China foreign policy is very long-term, because foreign policy can change every 4 years based on which party is in power, and it is basically determined on the votes of like Florida and Pennsylvania. But China, their leaders are very cohesive. They are thinking in centuries, not in weeks like America is. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is China's allies and countries that they're friends with. So ever since the Cold War was over, and the U.S. stopped supporting third world dictators as much, that meant a large population was living in democracy from then on, and that left a lot of autocrats in a tough spot because you got to be supported by someone, and America wasn't doing it anymore. So China welcomed them with open arms, and they also welcomed poorer countries, and this led to them having lots of economic influence in Africa and Latin America because they spread the money around quite a bit. Now, a lot of these countries that they're allies with currently could just default on their debts and become American allies with zero consequence, because like a country like Tanzania, who is technically an ally to China right now, could default on its debts, join the American alliance, and there's nothing China could do with it because America controls the oceans. And a lot of other allies are like that as well. Quite a few of them are actually, which wouldn't be good come wartime. And other allies like in Central Asia, their populations really don't like China, and the only reason they're allies is because the dictators there like China because they give them a ton of money. So yeah, and now the most important ally, or maybe not, most important ally is Russia. Russia and China are kind of a weird pair because they're allies because both of them don't like America. But if you before when I talked about 94% living in the wet eastern part of China, because of climate change that will displace a ton of people, and they will want to move up into Siberia, which is becoming quite temperate, which if America is taken care of, you know damn well that Russia and China will be at each other's throats immediately. Now the next thing that is important in geopolitical view is climate change, and I talked about it, and this feeds into the Russia point a bit, because climate change is going to affect China very heavily because I think it's like the northeast plain is projected to run out of water by 2030. This isn't entirely because of climate change, but more because of poor industrial practices there that made all the water terrible. So this led China to putting a ton of dams on the Brahmaputra and other rivers that supply India with water. This is very bad for India because this essentially gives China like a trump card on India, because they can just cut off their water. So that could make India a puppet state, but India is not going to stand for that. India doesn't want to be under Chinese control, and the most scary part about this is India is an American ally, and if India were to go to war with China, it is very easy for that to escalate into a world war. And I feel like that is the most likely scenario for World War III, and it is pretty scary, but yeah. So that's basically all I have to say on the geopolitical view. So let's get on to the next lens. The next lens I want to view China through is the demographic lens, and if you view them through this lens, you will think they're completely screwed because of their one-child policy, their birth rate has dropped immensely. They say it's 1.69, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's a 1 because the Chinese government isn't a completely reliable source. But having that for several generations is just terrible. And now if you look at because of this demographic shift, you see a country that is a lot like is a lot like Japan in the 1990s. Because Japan was a lot like China, but on a smaller scale. They were growing incredibly quickly. They were expected to be like a power, but because of their declining birth rate, they had a crash in the 90s, and then their economy never grew after that, and it was like a post-growth economy because all growth goes into sustaining their elderly population. Now, if you have an elderly population, it's not the biggest deal in the world if you're a country like Germany or Japan that's rich and can support them fairly easily. But if you're China, it's not that simple because you're not a rich country. China cannot support their elderly population the same way that Japan or Germany or Canada or places like that could do. Now, this most likely led to China coming up with the Belt and Road scheme, which is a scheme China has come up with to expand through Central Asia and Africa to put those countries into economic dependencies on China. Now, this is incredibly smart, but it only works. It'll work in the short term, definitely. It'll work very well in the short term, but in the long term, I don't see it working as well, because in order for it to work, China must have money to keep trading with these countries, and it seems like, and with their aging population, and the tariffs put on them by America and Europe, it is becoming a lot harder for them to make money, and their economy may crash. And not only that, the things China makes are lower on the value scale, meaning they trade more with less with smaller countries. And now, from the previous lens, a lot of China's allies are in a place where they can just default on their debts and become American allies. And now, the other way that they could do this is just trying to militarily take power over Central Asia, like in a country like Kazakhstan. This would not go well for China, because all the countries, India, Russia, the Americans, we would all come in and destroy China, because we wouldn't be having that. No one would. Now, the next part in the demographics is the sheer numbers of China. Now, China has 1.3 billion people. The U.S. has 300 million. This is a huge power. This is a huge population gap. And when countries of equal power tend to have go to war, the country with a bigger population tends to win. And like, if you look at the Soviets and the Germans in World War II, that's exactly what happened. And the gap between China and the U.S. is just too big for the U.S. to make up. A 4-to-1 KD is just incredible. It's never been done in history before. But if you account for Americans' allies like Europe, Australia, India, all those countries, they are more military power, they're more powerful than China, and they probably have a larger population as well. So, and I did do a video on World War III, and my conclusion was basically China would win if America got their allies together poorly, but if America mobilized their allies correctly and in a fast way, the Americans would win. Now, the next situation that China's in is like I can't say the word, but a Thucydides trap, but twice. Because if you look at China, because of their declining birth rate, they will quickly pass the Americans and then start declining, and then the Americans will pass them, which does not bode well for China. Because if you look at history, the last 16 times this has happened, most of them have countered in wars. Only 4 didn't happen. Only 4, there were no wars. So that does not bode well for China, considering they will be at twice. They will be the rising power once and the falling power the next time. But yeah, so that does not bode well for China at all, and their demographics really does not tell a good story about China. The next lens that I want to talk about China through is the economic lens. And now, China's economy is obviously very impressive, but there's a few things that a lot of people don't realize about it. It's a bubble economy, essentially, because they printed a ton of money, and that led to basically a situation a lot like 2008 or 1990s Japan. But in both those scenarios, like in 1990s Japan, the U.S. was in the position to pop Japan's bubble because Japan was an island nation that was completely dependent on the American empire. There's no one to pop China's bubble, so they could just keep printing more and more money and keep lying, and nothing would happen, and no one would stop them. But a mismanaged economy is never good for the future. It is not efficient in most cases, or it's less efficient, and it leads to bad things like stagnant wages and a lot of other things that could really hurt the economy. The next major thing with their economy is their labor cost. Their labor is relatively expensive, so they can't make cheap goods anymore because, like, if you want a t-shirt made, you go to Indonesia instead of China because China's relatively expensive. And to go along with this, they are also having an economic recession that is currently, and it's their weakest economic growth since 1990, in fact. And this could be caused by other things that I mentioned, but along with U.S. tariffs and things like that, because China's economy is very heavily supported by exporting things, and this is because they don't have their people don't have the money to buy the goods that they make, so they export a lot of them, and that's the basis for their economy. But with tariffs, it makes it a lot harder to do that. The next thing is the CCP. Now the CCP is basically only have power left in China. They've lost it across the world, basically. And the reason why they have power is because they have made a promise to, if the people can tolerate autocracy and all the bullshit that they do, they'll make the country rich. But with the continuous economic growth is impossible for every nation. So eventually there will be a recession or something like that, or some setback. And this means that the CCP has no real authority left. And now this is the reason why the Chinese government is doing things like having cameras everywhere, doing the social credit system to turn people against each other, having all these apps to make sure people are staying in line. So they're trying to get ahead of the revolt before it happens, essentially. Now another thing which is bad for their economy is that they're really dependent on Middle Eastern oil, and they do this by shipping it from like Saudi Arabia through through Indonesia and up through the South China Sea. Now this is bad because America has a much larger military and I don't think China will ever pass America's military, even with how much they spend. But with that, the U.S. control the ocean, so they could easily cut China's ability to get oil. This is most likely a driving factor for the Belt and Road scheme too, so they can have a ton of railroads throughout Central Asia and through Pakistan and their ally Iran, so they can get oil through land and not through the water, so the U.S. can't control that. But it is also a pretty long and tenuous line, which makes it pretty easy to cut as well, which is a problem. Now this could lead to a really terrible thing, because if the U.S. were to cut China's oil, that would mean they would have to use coal, which would be a disaster for the environment, and the environment's already basically screwed, and if they did that, we're going extinct. It's just that simple. If they had to use coal at the same time as India is industrializing with coal, it's over. It's over. The planet's dead, essentially. But yeah, so that's the economic view, so yeah, it's not looking as great as you would think, which is kind of surprising. The next thing I want to talk about is Chinese culture, and first we're going to talk about the Cultural Revolution, because it was pretty significant, because it meant like nearly 4,000 years of Chinese culture was just thrown out and replaced with nothing. And you can really tell this when you go to China as well. It seems like it is a country that doesn't believe in anything. It only believes in making money, and if you look at the structures, it's more like they're just big and profit machines rather than any significance. Like there's no real belief anymore, and there's a rise in atheism, and the people just don't believe in anything. And this is a really bad thing for a country, because life sucks and people need things to believe in, because it's pretty terrible if there's nothing there. Now, the Chinese government know this, and they're trying to resurrect things of Confucianism, but they are being pretty careful about this, because Confucianism says you should overthrow the government if it's like unjust or something like that. And it's doesn't, and they have like, I don't know, I'm just going to reiterate this point a ton of times, but they just don't believe in anything really. And this is why China is so threatened by Taiwan, because Taiwan is like a parallel universe of what China could have been, because Taiwanese culture is just better. It just, from what I've heard, it just seems better in every way, and from what I've read, it seems like it's just a lot more exciting and a lot more fun. And people in Taiwan seem to be more happy in happiness rankings, but those are really hard to measure, but I don't know. And not to mention this, but their working conditions are terrible. Their acronym is 996, which means 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. 6 days a week. That is terrible. That is being overworked. That's overworked incredibly hard. And not to mention that the housing prices are insane. The apartments are terrible. Or the apartments aren't terrible, but they're like really small and not very good. And it's like just an endless loop of going to work, coming home, and doing it over and over again, and it's just not a good time. And if you look at their birth rate, it's really bad. And if you look at just the whole world's birth rate, it's really bad. And this is normally a precursor for something bad that's going to happen, because if you look at like before World War I and World War II, the birth rate declined, and before things like the Black Death or the crisis of the 17th century, all of these things had lower birth rates before them, because humans are biological creatures, and when they stop making kids, something's going to be a problem. So, and the next thing is, because of their one-child policy, that means that there's a larger that only 48% of the population is women, and this leads to a large sexually frustrated male population, which is very bad. That leads to bad things, and a lot of a crisis in China's past was pre-staged by that same issue. But I will say, for China, their society does work very well. They do have much lower crime rates than almost everyone in the world, and it works, but it's a very bleak society to live in, if I'll say that. But yeah. I'm sorry that I said 6 lenses. I only meant 4, so practical joke got you there. But yeah, I just can't count, so yeah, sorry about that. But I hope you guys enjoyed this video. It was really fun researching China. It was really a good time, and it was interesting learning a ton of things that I didn't know about it, like how their economy is a bubble and how their birth rate has declined so much. I guess that was pretty I should have known that anyway because of the one-child policy, but you know, it's interesting to learn about different countries, and that's the main goal of the geopolitical series, is to teach you more about geopolitics and to get people more interested in learning things about different countries than rather just focusing on America or whatever country you're from, because it's really interesting to learn about different countries, and it is very valuable to learn about different countries so you can understand the different conflicts better and understand where both sides are coming from. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Remember to subscribe, like, comment, do all that stuff. So yeah, remember to subscribe, like, comment, do all that stuff. I do read all comments, so make sure to leave one. But yeah, thank you all for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. And yeah,